It may feel like just another day in the world according to Trump, but the drama in D.C. is more than just your run-of-the-mill partisan scuffling. It also threatens a major shift in the balance of power between Congress and the executive branch.
Ordinarily, at this point, I would introduce the witness, but instead, we will conclude this proceedings.
The House Judiciary Committee convened with an empty witness chair this morning when Attorney General William Barr refused to appear for a scheduled hearing about his handling of the Mueller report just hours after yesterday's contentious Senate testimony. And committee chair Congressman Jerry Nadler is taking the snub and refusal to submit an unredacted copy of Mueller's report very seriously.
We will make one more good faith attempt to negotiate and to get the access to the report that we need. And then, if we don't get that, we will proceed to hold the Attorney General in contempt.
Democrats are also threatening legal action against the AG over comments he made under oath in April about what he knew about the Mueller team's concerns with his handling of the report.
What is deadly serious about it is the Attorney General of the United States of America was not telling the truth to the Congress of the United States. That's a crime.
The Department of Justice pushed back against Pelosi in a statement saying the baseless attack on the Attorney General is reckless, irresponsible, and false. But Democratic leaders in the House aren't letting up, saying the next step may be a subpoena to legally compel Barr to appear. But after this comment from the president last week, do we really expect his administration to comply?
We're fighting all the subpoenas. Look, these aren't like impartial people. The Democrats are trying to win 2020. The only way they can luck out is by constantly going after me on nonsense.
Of course, the threat to President Trump isn't just coming from Democrats. There is one Republican hoping to block Trump from a second term in a race that the challenger referred to as two large orange men going at each other. Former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld spent a large chunk of his career at the Department of Justice as an assistant attorney general in charge of the criminal division, and as U.S. attorney here in Massachusetts, where an assistant U.S. attorney who reported to him was one Robert Mueller. And, of course, Weld also ran for vice president, Libertarian ticket in 2016. Governor, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here.
So is Pelosi right? Did Barr lie to Congress, and is it a crime?
Someone else would decide whether he lied, but if he did, it would be a crime. And I've seen this whole movie before.
Meaning what?
In 1974, when I worked on the Nixon impeachment. And there, the House Judiciary Committee served subpoenas on the administration, the president, and they refused to comply. And that went right to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled 8-0 in the United States versus Nixon, that no man is above the law, the president is not above the law. And President Nixon, unlike, I suspect, President Trump, had the self-awareness and understanding of the system to know that he had to comply with the Supreme Court order, and within a month he was gone.
I want to talk about Nixon in a couple of minutes. I'm assuming, unlike the Senate Judiciary Chair, Lindsey Graham, you've read the whole Mueller report.
I have.
Is that correct? Okay. So the Attorney General tried to explain why he concluded that the president had not obstructed justice. I know you do not agree with that conclusion. Why?
He filed this 19-page report with the Justice Department in June of 2018, unsolicited, and it said no one can commit the offense of obstruction of justice unless they committed the underlying crime. Well, that's completely baseless. There's no case law. There's nothing to support that, and that would mean that Richard Nixon could not have been proceeded against for contempt of Congress, as he was, unless he had been in the basement of the Watergate Hotel with G. Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt. It's a ridiculous idea.
But that doesn't mean that Trump obstructed justice. It just means that you believe that Barr's interpretation of what a president can and cannot do is wrong. But based on what you read in the Mueller report, did he obstruct justice?
Volume 2 of the Mueller report, which is 200 pages long, is completely filled with acts of obstruction, trying to get Mueller fired, trying to get the investigation narrowed, saying to Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, so you got to say this. No, that would be a lie. I can't do that. Well, what's your point? It's not true, Mr. President. Your point, please. Same with Ambassador K.T. McFarland, or designate K.T. McFarland. Lie. His legal counsel. Lie. The man has no idea about the truth. He's a stranger to the truth.
So do you disagree with Mueller and the Office of Legal Counsel memo that a sitting president is unindictable?
I do. I'll tell you why. Because the Constitution says a president and anyone else remains liable to indictment, prosecution, and punishment after they leave office. And if it was impossible to charge a president at all, they could escape punishment by getting reelected, because the statute of limitations for federal crimes is generally 5 years. So what I would have done on that evidence is sought a sealed indictment, so we wouldn't be hauling the president into criminal court every day, because I do agree you can't do that. You shouldn't do that, because we've got to run a world out there.
Sealed until he leaves office?
Yeah.
What if the statute of limitation tolls in these things? Does it matter?
No.
Should he get a second term?
A sealed indictment will satisfy.
Will satisfy.
Oh, yeah. No.
You know, as I mentioned this morning, Barr failed to appear this morning, and the president has made it clear, as you heard in that clip, and I'm sure you know, that he has no intention of complying with subpoenas or allowing people like the Don McGahns of the world to testify. Are we approaching a constitutional crisis?
Yeah,
what does that mean?
Well, I think we may be, because the president's strategy, which is now Bill Barr's strategy, is just to say, oh, no, the other side is partisan. And that's all they're saying. The president obviously is not going to join issue on a substantive way about any of this stuff, because he has nothing to say. He can't deny that the stuff in Volume 2 of the Mueller report constitutes obstruction of justice. He can't deny, because at the end of the Mueller report it makes it clear that what he did shows contemptuous conduct, the necessary degree of criminal intent. He has nowhere to go. So all he can say is, I'm not going to play. I'm going to take my ball and go home.
So what happens? I mean, people like me throw around the term constitutional crisis, I'd say much more irresponsibly than we should. I don't know what that means. Okay, it happens. There's a standoff, which there appears to be now. Who moves? What happens?
Well, I would say the House Judiciary Committee, which is a seat of enormous power, by the way, ultimately is going to prevail in this one. This is why I say I've seen the movie before, because that White House dug in, said, we're not going to give you anything, and they lost. And that
prevail in court, you're talking about.
That would go to the Supreme Court of the United States, unlike impeachment, which, contrary to what President Trump thinks, does not go to the Supreme Court.
You know, you mentioned you served on the House Judiciary Committee with another woman who people probably heard of, a woman by the name of Hillary Clinton. One of the articles of impeachment, I think it was the first, doesn't really matter, was about that president impeding the investigation into the break-in to the Democratic National Committee by creep, the committee re-elect the president. How does the alleged obstruction of Richard Nixon compare, in your mind, to the alleged obstruction of this current president?
I'd say obstruction by Nixon is a 3 or 4 and Trump is a 9.
Why do you say that? Because
it's so clear he instructed people to lie, all kinds of different people, and he said, I want this guy fired, I want this dropped. Nixon said to Haldeman and Ehrlichman, no, tell them they should drop this investigation, tell them it's national security. That's it. That's it.
So why are you not for impeachment? That Judiciary Committee drafted articles of impeachment, approved 3, I think, out of 5. But I've read accounts of you suggesting that impeachment is the wrong path.
Well, that's a political conclusion. It's not a legal conclusion. The House would be completely within their rights in impeaching the president, and then you'd have 12 months of nasty publicity ending 2 or 3 months before the election, and then you know the president's going to rear up in his hind legs and say, see, I was acquitted in the Senate because they didn't get 67 votes. They only got 61 votes. Therefore, I win. Therefore, I was completely exonerated, and now let's run to Election Day, and all my supporters have to support me.
But isn't that setting a horrible precedent? If Donald Trump is...
It would not be the first horrible precedent that this president set.
No, I'm not talking about a horrible precedent on the part of the president. I'm talking about a horrible precedent on the part of accountability or unaccountability. If the reason, and it appears Nancy Pelosi agrees with you for the same reasons, at least as of yesterday.
Yeah, political.
But what does that say? That a president essentially then can do whatever he or someday she chooses? And if it's politically inexpedient because you can't get 67 votes in the Senate, you don't do it? Is that, I mean, that's what you and Pelosi are saying.
I would point out to you that Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution says the president remains liable for indictment, prosecution, and punishment after he leaves office. So it's not like you're giving up all cudgels for all time.
But it is like the whole notion of oversight on the part of the Congress is being ignored on their part because they can't get enough votes in the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. That's Senator Warren's argument is there's a moral responsibility to act.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
you don't think there is.
That's not ridiculous, but I'm here to try to make sure that Mr. Trump does not get 6 more years of what he's shown this country already.
I want to talk about your effort in a couple of seconds. I think it was Senator Goldwater, if I'm wrong, I'm sure you'll correct me, who was one of the people who went to Richard Nixon and said there are not enough votes.
Oh, it sure was.
It was Goldwater. Yeah. Okay. So I know this is a hypothetical, but why not? Would this Senate have convicted Richard Nixon based on the evidence that was before them?
I don't know. It's kind of tough. This is not as big a margin, perhaps, but that was a Democratic Senate.
Why'd you hesitate to ask that? No, but I understand it's a Republican Senate now.
Right.
So would this Senate have convinced? When you hear, forget that. When you hear friends of yours, colleagues of yours, Republicans in the Senate towing the company line, not evincing even an ounce of concern, other than maybe your successor, Governor Romney, after the Mueller report came out, about the behaviors of...
there is an answer to your question.
What is the answer?
And I think this Senate would have convicted Mr. Nixon because he had no support in the Senate when people saw that he lied to the American public on TV.
So Governor, what's your reaction to your fellow Republicans who basically are standing by their man? It's one thing to say we support his policies, we don't think he should be impeached, we wouldn't vote to convict, but when they're not even willing to question the behavior of a Barr or the question of the president himself as detailed in the Mueller report, does that concern you or no?
Oh, very much. I mean, I think it's a case of the emperor in his new clothes, and everyone's just whistling past the graveyard and saying, I'm happy, happy, happy. And most people in Washington are obsessed with getting reelected, so they want to play the game of R versus D. And that, as you saw from that clip, is the only game that the president is prepared to play.
What was Mueller like when he worked for you?
Very, very thorough. I've described him as the straightest man I ever met.
What do you think of the fact that he has done virtually nothing to correct the public record, other than one statement when BuzzFeed came out saying Mueller has evidence that the president personally instructed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress? He said it's not accurate. He never even explained what wasn't accurate. Why has he not told the public what both, forget BuzzFeed, what Bob Barr or Bill Barr has gotten wrong? Are we entitled to know that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mueller did a huge service by getting all of the bad stuff into that volume 2. I mean, you can bet that Bill Barr tried to sit on that one as well. But Mueller, given where he sat, if he came into Bill Barr and said, I'm going to seek an indictment for obstruction, and Bill Barr said, no, under my reading of that statute, you can't do it, no matter how unreasonable that reading is. Okay, so he outranks Mueller in the department. I think Mueller did very well to get as much stuff on the public record as he did and let Congress and the American people judge.
Chuck Todd from Meet the Press was on the radio with us today and said, I wouldn't count on, even despite 2 statements, public statements by Barr, that I have no problem with Mueller testifying before Congress. I wouldn't count on Mueller ever getting before Congress, that Trump's going to do everything he can to stop him. Do you buy that?
Well, he might at some point in time no longer be an employee of the Department of Justice, so the position might be a little different then.
Before you go, I met you 29 years ago. I don't know if you remember, in the hall of the State House. I was running a ballot campaign where I was getting crushed. You were roughly 40 points behind a guy by the name of Steve Pearson, a Republican primary. You beat him. You're even further behind now, Donald Trump. Give me a quick version of your pathway to victory in the Republican primary.
Oh, it's winning the New Hampshire primary, or showing so well there that Mr. Trump is tipped off his pins and going on. I hope to run strong in the 6 New England primaries. I'm going to try very hard to win some mid-Atlantic states. I think in a primary, the West Coast is very inhospitable for Mr. Trump, particularly California. I certainly would contest New York. No, the votes are there if you get momentum from New Hampshire.
We're out of time, but if you were asked the following question, would you have an answer? What is Aleppo? Would you be able to answer that question?
Yes, I would. Yes.
You would. I just wanted to be clear. Governor Weld, it's great to see you.
Thanks
so much. Really appreciate your time. Governor Bill Weld.